Good evening. This is Jeffrey Tucker. I'm so glad to be talking with you tonight from Liberty.me's Liberty.me's channel on YouTube. We're doing a Google Hangout tonight with Alex Winter, which is such a pleasure because he is a director of a movie I saw recently, and I, by the way, paid to watch. I must say. It's far easier to just take out the credit card than it is to.
Yeah, it is.
Some of us anyway. Anyway, Alex, it's good. Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me.
Okay, let me see if I can get this thing off. Okay, you should be able to talk now, and it'll put you on camera.
Great.
Yeah, is it working? Can you see yourself?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, there we go. There we go. It's working now. I've done this before, but I've inadvertently put myself on the air or put the other person on the air the whole hour. So anyway, in any case, yeah. If you haven't seen the deep web, I'm just talking to people now because, you know, God knows how long people will stick with this video. But if you haven't seen it, what you should do right now is click off this interview and then go to iTunes, or I think, is it Amazon, or what else? Where else is it?
Yeah, it's pretty much anywhere VOD. So iTunes, Amazon, Vimeo, BitTorrent is doing a bundle. It's in a bunch of places.
Actually, you know, now that you mention it, I saw it on Vimeo, which was interesting to me because this is not, you know, a kind of like, you know, famous platform for distribution of videos or anything, or maybe it is, but, or maybe they found their niche in paid videos. But I went there, searched it, found it, threw down $5 or whatever ridiculous price it was, and was able to watch the entire thing. So that everybody should just do something like that. It's so worth it. I mean, what you cover about the Silk Road is stuff that's not known elsewhere. In fact, there were so many details that I didn't know myself, even though I've written, you know, a half a dozen or a dozen articles about the topic. So extremely intriguing. I mean, even though I, you know, had been in correspondence, as you probably know, with Ross early on. In fact, I'm a little unclear about the nature of our relationship. I have some sense that it might have been more, how do I say? Like I might have been a larger part of his life than he was of mine, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he was, you know, what we know of him categorically, the stuff that appeared before the anonymous stuff, the stuff that appeared in LinkedIn and in other areas of communication, other forums that he was involved in. You know, he was a very, very bright and very curious and very intellectually hungry and engaged individual. So I'm not surprised, you know.
Well, he was all over the forums I was running. He was all over the website I was running, and he got deeply influenced by an ideal, you know, and that's, I think, more important than anything else, because, you know, you read the press releases on this guy and follow the news media. You lose track of the ideal that he was chasing, which was, you know, the birth of a world of a beautiful world of perfect voluntarism and trade without the violence of the state unjustly punishing people. I mean, that's the ideal he saw, as I understand.
Yeah, agreed. And, you know, whatever, you know, the case may be about, because there were certainly so many other people who were involved in the construction and running of the Silk Road, and we'll never truly know, you know, exactly how much DPR, Ross claims he wasn't DPR, but how much DPR was Ross, how much wasn't, how many other DPRs there were. But there was so much language on the Silk Road forums that had nothing to do with drugs whatsoever. And you know, when they did, they did. It's not to try to paint a smiley face on it, but the sort of misunderstanding of what the community of the Silk Road was. And thankfully, I was around to really scrutinize the community, and it reminded me an enormous amount of other communities I'd seen on the internet, just going way back, because I'm fairly old, to the late 80s when I first became sort of an avid member of online communities back in the BBS era. And the discourse was very similar. There was, you know, a fair amount of libertarian discourse, but the beauty of it was that there was all kinds of discourse. You know, there was a great variety of intelligent discussion going on within the freedom of the anonymity and also just the openness and democratization of that technology.
Well, as a matter of fact, I kind of for me, it's personally, when I talk about Silk Road, I never describe it as an online narcotics marketplace, because that's not what it was established to be. That wasn't its purpose. That wasn't Ross never sought out and thought, oh, this is a great way to make money and have people trading drugs with each other. It was really all about freedom and observing the unworkability of existing prohibitions and trying to find smart and humane ways of getting around them in a way that were nonviolent and conducive to human flourishing. That was my sense of the ethos surrounding the Silk Road. Does that sound right to you?
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, the thing about, there are certainly questions as to where it all went, and what happened to that ethos, and in what ways was that ethos corrupted, and certainly things got ugly, and there were a lot of people on the Silk Road that were nefarious, that worked their way into that system. And again, that's the democratization of that technology. I mean, I'd seen that happening with Napster, which I worked with extensively, which started also as a very, very idealistic and sort of visionary humanistic technology. That was the motivation for creating it. That was the kind of spark in Sean Fanning's brain, was bringing hundreds of millions of people together on the internet. And to him, music or file sharing was just one component of it that would help bring people together, because people love music so much. But it was really the community that he was driven by. And the Napster forums were very similar to the Silk Road forums. They were less, it was almost like Napster grew up. It was almost like Napster was like really brilliant high school kids, and Silk Road was really brilliant postgraduate students. There was a more sophisticated level of political discourse on the Silk Road in general, and that's a long way around of answering your question, which is to say, categorically, I think most people, and I'm talking about sensible people, not sort of the people who have taken hyperbolic perspectives one way or the other on Silk Road, but other computer scientists that I know and other people who investigated the Silk Road early, we all bonded because we all knew it wasn't an opinion. We all knew that the Silk Road was a political organism and a liberty-oriented organism, and that's what it was, and that's what its motive was, and that's what the Silk Road forums were filled with. It wasn't a question; it was really a fact. If you were there in those days.
Do you remember that message that Ross posted? I think in your film you mentioned it. It appeared on LinkedIn. Well, that same message, I'm pretty sure, I haven't compared it word for word, but I'm pretty sure I got that in my personal email. Do you remember? Yeah, this would have been what, 2009, something like that.
Yeah, it was in that era, and that's he was really sort of post grad school. He was really interested in what was going on in the world, and looking at mechanisms and economic experiments and test cases for how to sort of utilize technology to create systems that would expedite the ability for people to circumvent laws that people found were unjust, to be able to communicate with each other in a free and open way, to be able to exchange with each other. The thing about what Ross created, and what we know categorically that he's admitted he created, was, and people take this away from him, and again, it's not to exonerate the service or anything, but it was a brilliant idea to combine Tor and Bitcoin the way that he did. And that was brilliant. And that's an inarguably brilliant watershed moment in technology that is going to keep going and going and going, just like when Sean Fanning had the brilliant idea of a way to create a fluid, efficient, scalable, peer-to-peer service. It just worked. So, that was, you can see his brain was really going. And in the LinkedIn and some of the other communications that he had in that era, you can see where his mind was. And you can also see where it wasn't. Like if you look at the book selling service that he had in Texas shortly before Silk Road went on, called Good Wagon, that was also a very kind of sort of liberty-minded, it was about sort of giving profits back to in short, charity organizations and people in prison and things like that. But the technology of Good Wagon Books was really crude. It was, this isn't someone who was a tech mastermind. He was really more of a political thinker and an idealistic thinker and an intellectual than he was like a hacker or a technologist.
I think it's interesting that you pointed that out, and I'm sure it comes out in the film. The combination of Tor and the Bitcoin, because I was deeply involved in this world at the time, and I, of all people, should have been able to discern the merit of Bitcoin as a privately created currency that would, sort of liberate the world from official institutions of banks and central banks and all the rest of it. But at that period in history, I mean, we're talking really at the outset of its invention, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be another 3 or 4 years before I would realize, what existed in the form of Bitcoin and its significance. And it is kind of remarkable that he not only saw that. I mean, it's interesting. He's like a true entrepreneur in a sense that, like, there's nothing impeding his brain flow. He wasn't overly encumbered by theories he learned in graduate school about monetary theory, which is one of the reasons most economists didn't believe that Bitcoin could exist, was because they were essentially knew too much. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that for those of us who have been following, the evolution of the cypherpunks and the evolution of people using technology to sort of, create, new ways for human beings to congregate or to exchange, cryptocurrencies have been talked about for decades. And, in fact, I have, I'd interviewed Tim May, who was one of the original cypherpunks, for, research in my film. And Tim, I think, wrote one of the earliest white papers on cryptocurrency back in the late 80s. So I think for a lot of people, you just thought, oh, here's another person taking a stab at one of those weird cryptocurrencies. But to someone like Ross, who was young and hadn't been around and hadn't looked at all that stuff, he just thought, oh, this works. I know enough about math to know this works. Yeah. And so I'm going to combine it and boom. And that's how great tools get created.
Yeah. Awesome. Whereas I looked at it and thought, wait, no, you can't do that. I mean, that's
that's what I thought too. I thought this is a great idea philosophically. Like, I love the idea of this, of creating, an end-to-end cryptographic currency, or even the whole idea of the blockchain. Again, my brain just went into other, like, wow, you can use that for contracts, you can use that for this or that, but he had a very simple way of using it. And again, that's usually how things scale and take off, as someone who sees things that are complicated in very simple terms. And I've seen that again and again in technology. That's where the really big leaps forward happen, where someone goes, oh, there's, peer-to-peer is complex, but if I use it this way, which is simple, everyone will use it. And that happened with Silk Road as it happened with Napster.
And maybe this wasn't an issue for you personally, because you've been making these films. You made a film about Napster. You've been kind of investigating these worlds for a while. There's some reason you're interested in them. The only thing I really knew about illegal, narcotics was that they're sort of scary and dangerous, and that they occur, that people trade them in sort of shady areas of town or whatever. And I never really thought of them as universal goods that people desire, that are sort of a human right, essentially. I mean, not that different from alcohol. It's just another substance that people use and sometimes abuse. And the first time I went to Silk Road, what struck me most about Alex was the how do I put it, like, the normalcy of the goods being traded. Mm-hmm. It had a profound effect on me. I'm not sure I can quite describe it right. Like, something that had previously been dark and mysterious and inherently dangerous in my mind. That's not the right word. Inherently, like, demonically mysterious,
Right. Mm-hmm.
Suddenly became, in fact, in my own mind, what it is, which is just physical substances that people desire to consume, for whatever reason. And it normalized the markets. It rationalized them for me, at least in my own mind.
Yeah, it was. I would agree. It's why I wanted to make the movie, is that it is so internally contentious. I mean, obviously it's externally contentious because it has the idea of drugs. We're in a prohibition state, so drugs are heavily demonized by law enforcement, by the media. The hypocrisy of that compared to the fact that there are parking lots in bars, which the idea of a parking lot in a bar doesn't make any sense, right? So the notion that we can fixate on something and say this is evil, whereas oxy and alcohol is pretty easy to get and is killing people in droves, and is being horribly abused. So I did always know, I do some work in recovery, just sort of on the charitable side, sort of helping outreach teams and things like that. I started as a child actor, and I've always done work with other sort of youth that are in trouble for whatever reason. So, I was certainly aware of the damage that can be caused by abuse of anything. And so it was interesting to me that something like the Silk Road literally leaps over the whole argument of the kind of superficial ethics of whether drugs are good or bad, because it goes, okay, well, we've legalized alcohol, so obviously we don't really care about your well-being. This notion that we care about, we meaning the state cares about your well-being, is erroneous. So let's just put, and this is not me, this is the Silk Road, just set it over here and forget about that for a second.
Right.
And that is such a profoundly radical step, I think. And I'm always intrigued when I show the movie, and I have to tell you that 99, and we're not saying drugs are good. My whole point is that's not the point, right? That's over here. Alcohol may be bad or good. Drugs may be bad or good. That's irrelevant. The state has made drugs illegal. We can look at why they did that. That's important, right? Because that gets into the drug war and profit motives and mass incarceration, all these horrible things, just as it did with alcohol prohibition. And I do have an opinion about that. But the Silk Road really is a very, very radical technology. And when people see the movie, most audiences have the same reaction that you or I do. They go, wow, I never really thought of it that way. And it's not to say that they go, great, drugs are great, let's just all start doing drugs. But they see beyond that hyper simplistic and somewhat manipulative or propagandized argument.
That's right.
The larger issues, which is, not going to make you everyone's friend if you make a film like this. People are going to, I'd say that some of the more establishment-oriented press have been less open-minded, shall we say. But we've largely gotten very, very good reviews all over the place, and we've been in festivals, in every major film festival has taken us. They haven't been afraid of it. They've loved the movie and been very supportive. But you do get that person who raises their hand after the movie and just screams at you, like, how can you make a movie like this that glamorizes drugs and says that these people doing these horrible things were anything other than demons and devils. And it's important, I think, to tell stories like that may not be easy to swallow, but the Silk Road, I think, is really significant.
I mean, there's a couple of points to this. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about the Silk Road that I saw is that there was a real strong sense of accountability there. There was user reviews, and I was shocked. I think the first time I went there, there was a bit of cocaine or something, which is the Wall Street drug, basically, right?
Yeah. It's primarily marijuana is what they moved. By far.
I wanted to say it's primarily marijuana, right? Yeah. Which is now legal in many and most big cities. Although I should point out that despite its legalization, somebody is arrested for marijuana distribution or consumption every 48 seconds in the country right now. So we shouldn't forget this.
Yeah.
Despite sometimes it feels like there's a liberalization. It really isn't. There's really not. I mean, the injustice is ongoing. But I appreciated the fact there was some accountability for the first time brought to these markets. Now, if you think that standing up in a theater, as you say, and screaming that this stuff is terrible is going to accomplish something, then okay, but it probably isn't. I mean, there are millions and tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people around the world that are going to continue to seek after these substances, and
people need help, whether they're using pot or heroin or oxy or alcohol or drinking Drano. That's a completely separate issue, and if those people need. I would argue if you decriminalize these things, then you move it much more easily into a mental health area.
Well, and and you bring some accountability to the production side of things, which is another major advantage that the Silk Road did. I mean, you couldn't just make any kind of crap and send it out there that was deadly or damaging or dangerous or whatever. I don't, you know, these markets it's exactly like prohibition. It's very dangerous for to drink alcohol in the 1920s. You never know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And you know, by the way, Alex, I'm speaking about this subject. I mean, I'm a weird person. I can't stand pot. I don't even like to smell of it. I haven't smelled it since I was 15 years old. I mean, I can't. You know, this is not my world. You know,
but maybe that's why you have a more open mind to it more quickly, because I'm the same way. You know, and I've got kids, and my kids are thankfully, you know, pretty much straight edge, and they lead. You know, we lead, I guess, by sideways example. We're certainly not, you know, dictatorial at home, but I'm, you know, what you would call straight edge. I don't drink at all, and I never was interested in drugs. So, you know, I never came to it with that kind of bias of the sort of defensiveness of like, well, I want my pot, or, you know, I drink my booze, but I'm okay, and I'm not doing anything terrible. So and I've seen the damage that it's done. I've done, you know, work in the recovery and mental health areas, just, you know, for teen outreach. So, to me, they're just separate issues. I just can't. I don't look at them as being the same issue as other people do. And I also would go one step farther to say that I don't like being told what I should or shouldn't demonize. It makes me suspect, frankly.
Yeah, that's crazy. So pot was a major thing, which strikes you immediately, because I'm not sure how the Silk Road, if I'm right about this, but am I right that the best-selling items would tend to appear on the front page, the scroll?
Well, it worked very similar to eBay in a sense, and you know, I spoke with a lot of the core vendors on the Silk Road. The vendors, the architects, and the biggest buyers are really who I did my research with, and I talked to a lot of them. Only a couple of them are in the film, and they were, and again, like them or not, no judgment call, but they were very, very, very bright. And it absolutely was a community. And you have to remember that one of the reasons it could be a community, there were two reasons. One is trust, which is what you're getting at, which is that there was absolute accountability. If you sold bad goods, you got a low grade, you were written up on the forms, and you were gone. I mean, you were gone really fast. And the only way you stayed there and gained any regularity on the site was if your product was absolutely, not only was it good, it was healthy. It was as healthy as could be. And you, as a vendor, participated in your customers' well-being, meaning that the people I was talking to who were the highest rated vendors, these people had, like, you know, health maintenance forum posts. They were walking people through, you know, the mythologies around certain drugs. And again, it's not to condone it. This is just simply what it was, whether you think it's evil or not.
And I've always, I believe this about pot. In fact, I think one of the reasons, because I find pot just preposterous and mind-numbing and idiotic. The only reason I can imagine that pot is as popular as it is because it took on a sort of a status that's, you know, like the Vogue of Breaking Bad. I mean, like Nixon's war on pot massively subsidized it in a cultural sense. You know, it just became. And one of the reasons I'd love to see pot like completely legalized, and this I'd say this about LSD, heroin, whatever else, is precisely so that it could be, you know, evaluated in a rational way.
Completely.
And I think in irrational markets, you know, where things are illegal, you know, human normalcy and consideration would gradually depreciate them in a cultural sense. Whereas right now, you know, they don't exist in that world. So of course, you know, everybody's weirdly drawn to them, like, you know, like Eve in the garden, you know, towards the apple. I mean, it's.
I could not agree with you more. I mean, if you look historically at alcohol, the birth and evolution of alcohol recovery grew from almost the day that Prohibition ended.
Yeah.
And it's just common sense, you know. And if you make something contraband, obviously you mythologize it and you create a mystique around it. And this idea, you know, then you go one step farther, which is just the really heinous uses and exploitation of that the drug war imposes in terms of incarceration, in terms of who's really getting put in jail over drug offenses are primarily minorities and poor people. And, you know, it becomes a tool, a very, very dangerous tool. Then you look at the cartels and the horrible violence that goes on as a result of the cartels. And the cartels have been moving out of marijuana for the last few years because they know it's slowly making its way to legality. So the statistics are obvious. You make these things legal, this type of violence begins to decrease. So there's really, there's very little to argue for this idea of criminalizing either from the mental health side or the crime and violence side.
And you've also had on Silk Road somebody I've heard very little talk about this. Everybody between 18 and 21 right now, or 16 and 21, faces the equivalent of prohibition in terms of alcohol. Mm-hmm. And it's no different for that age group than it was for the whole population in the 1920s. And they're clamoring for these fake IDs, and you hear about Silk Road's fake IDs in the press, and it sounds like, oh, they're engaged in identity fraud and theft. It's not true. I mean, basically, these are 20-year-old kids who want to be able to like normal people in the whole rest of the known world, apart from Kazakhstan and God knows where. Saddle up to a bar and order a beer on tap, for God's sake. They can't do that in the land of the free. So of course they want a fake, and Silk Road had the best fakes on the planet, essentially. It's just a fact.
Yeah, and then I think that there's sort of a two-prong mythologizing that's gone on. One is this notion that the Silk Road was primarily inhabited by there were some, but it appears to be largely the corrupt law enforcement that were the most heavy-duty, nasty people there. It was a pretty small community in the scheme of things. Certainly in terms of drug sales, it was it amounted to like a street corner in Baltimore. You're dealing with a very small community of mostly like-minded younger people, as you say, who were there talking about movies and records and like the fact that they could communicate freely and anonymously and that they could exchange whatever they wanted to exchange. And if you look at the Silk Road, I mean, there was all kinds of stuff being sold there. It really was like Craigslist meets this sort of contraband site. You have had other dark markets that have gone for a more kind of, intensified mercenary, but they still tend to only service, they're still mostly selling pot, just to keep it all in perspective, and they're still not servicing a large population. It is mostly sort of a younger generation that's using technology to congregate in a way that they feel is liberating to them. And again, it's not a judgment call to say this is great or this is terrible. It's really just a fact. So you had that on the one side, that the community was really more of a community than it was this sort of massive global drug conspiracy. I have a big problem with that because it wasn't giant. It was pretty small. And then you also had this idea of the ethos behind it, which was always present. And yes, there were people who didn't go by it. Yes, there were cynical people. Sure, there were people who were trying to use Bitcoin to make money and do silly things. But the large sort of community, even the vendors and buyers that I met with and spoke to, even people that I know that went to jail and have already come out of jail, again, these were very similar to the people that I knew back in the BBS era, who were using technology mostly to congregate, mostly for social reasons.
Now, we oftentimes talk about the Silk Road in the past tense, and your movie is made at a very interesting moment. I mean, it's like, I think you closed it out like as the trial was about to begin, is my impression.
It ends as the trial. It ends with the sentencing.
Okay, it ends with the sentencing. Okay, so you're making it in 6 months, previous to that and everything. Yeah. So, but we all often talk about Silk Road in the past tense, but in fact, I think there's still a Silk Road in existence, and there's many other more advanced technologies that are out there right now, and they're doing even more business. Am I right? Than the original.
Oh, yeah, the Silk Road was the beginning, just like Napster was the beginning. The idea of combining Tor and Bitcoin to show people that there was this place where they could congregate anonymously. The light has been turned on. It's you can't turn that light off. It's a step in a direction that you can't come back from. Just like Napster spawned all these copycats, Kazaa and LimeWire and all this stuff. And then eventually BitTorrent was decentralized where Napster was centralized, and you were off to the races, and that's never going to go away ever. And BitTorrent is now a very legitimate, regular company that distributes movies and things like that. The Silk Road is exactly the same. And I would argue that what you're going to see with Silk Road is two different paths. You're going to see the rise of anonymous communities, which was a very big part of Silk Road and its ethos and its idealism, and the idea of people congregating in a sort of free environment and trading. And that's going to become decentralized. There are services like Open Bazaar that are already going this route.
Right.
And that will be it won't be hard to shut down. It will not be possible to shut those down. There's no way to shut this world down. You can play whack-a-mole with the dark markets all day long, but this train has left the station. But what's different between Silk Road and Napster, which I find very interesting, is what you got on the other side, which is it does have the possibility to change law. The Silk Road, I honestly believe, is going to shine a light for a lot of other people who may find the Silk Road distasteful, but are going to be working sort of anti-prohibition minded people, many of them coming from law enforcement, like the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition organization, which is such a fantastic organization, all ex-law enforcement and even some current law enforcement working to end the drug war. These people have really taken a page from the Silk Road book and thought, well, this is actually the way to go. It may take time before us to get there, but creating drug markets that allow people to get the help they need, get the communication they need, have the trust, have the access. There's already stories of people getting allergy medication that's saving their life from these online darknet markets because the insurance companies are so nefarious and it's so difficult for them to get the medicine they so desperately need. So they're going to these services to be able to stay alive or to be able to access these things. So I do think the Silk Road is shining a light towards something that's going to be ubiquitous 10, 20 years down the road.
On that subject, I'm not much of a deep web user myself. I mean, when I have to.
Who is really? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, I find it a little bit tricky. I mean, and people always ask me things about the deep web. They're like, well, where is that link? Should I Google it? And it's like, no, you can't do that. You have to be. But it's always amazed me how people with a certain passion for something that they absolutely have to have. Give them 10 minutes, they're gonna figure it out, even without, so
navigating the darknet using, however easy they've made Tor, and they've made it much easier. Navigating it is very cumbersome. I've got a very tech savvy 17-year-old. He has no interest in the darknet. There's nothing there. He doesn't do drugs, so he has no interest in going on there for drugs. The other people that are using the darknet are journalists, whistleblowers, government agencies, rape and drug counseling organizations. There's no real reason to. It's also very small. It's another myth about it. But there's no real reason to be there. So as you say, yes, if your wife needs an allergy medication and you're freaking out because you can't get it, you're gonna figure out how to use Tor. You're gonna get a bit
figure it out.
Going. Yeah, and that's.
But Alex, what, and I don't know that your film really goes into it, but what struck me is slightly more strange about all this stuff is that many of these services have gone from the darknet to the normal World Wide Web, so that, I mean, I'm just going to say it, and I don't think I'm getting in trouble for saying it. You can get almost any mainstream prescription drug now.
Yes.
With a credit card, on the just by Googling around.
There's much more crime in terms of this mythological idea that the darknet is filled with crime. The darknet is tiny. That's the first myth that needs to be broken. It's not 5,000 times larger than the surface web. It's infinitesimally small. And there's way more crime on the surface web, way more child pornography, way more guns, way more drugs. There's way more of all those things there. The one thing that isn't there that I agree with you actually is going to make its way to the surface web are these darknet markets, are these specific darknet markets. It's you can't go and do eBay style shopping for pot on the surface web as easily yet. But that is absolutely a capital Y.
Now, right now you can get almost any prescription. You can get birth control pills and I mean, just almost any drug you regularly take is going to be available in its generic form.
Yeah.
On just by Googling around, and you can order it from any one of many countries around the world, and that was not true even 10 years ago. There was a big crackdown on these kind of online pharmacies, but it's almost like I don't really understand how law enforcement works. But one thing that seems fairly obvious is that it doesn't have infinite resources to police, everything. So
No, what I found is, thankfully, where they've done the best in digital crime is in human trafficking and child pornography, where you really want them to be doing their best. And, the child trafficking and child pornography and human trafficking digital crime units are really, really sophisticated and are doing an incredible job. I think that unfortunately there are mandates, and, government agencies and three-letter agencies, they are mandated by the state to do what they're told. And right now, I can't tell you how many law enforcement officers off the record, I mean, a couple of them in the movie are on the record saying, we are doing this until we are told to stop doing this. We are going to prosecute the drug war and prosecute these dark nets and go after this stuff with extreme prejudice until we have a mandate to stop doing that. So it's an interesting predicament we find ourselves, because there's so many resources that could be better used elsewhere or just not used at all, going towards enforcing and prosecuting the drug war. And, that's obviously, there's an enormous backlash against that. And the Silk Road is I would say, a very effective backlash, because it shows people, the other ways and means to circumvent those laws. But it also shows people who are trying to think past prohibition, how they can start to create steps to get away from it.
Now, you've been making these films in this sort of edgy areas now for a while, and one of the things that your film brings up, which I very much appreciate, is so the details of the case, the evidence, how it was collected, what was allowed in court, the way the government manipulated the media, which it takes a passing interest in these things, so they tend to report just what the prosecution says. The ways in which the trial was manipulated, at every level and every way, in shocking ways that you would normally say, oh, well, clearly this should be a mistrial, but then it's somehow not. Were you in any sense surprised at the level of, I don't know, what would you call it, malfeasance or manipulation or corruption or something that you saw?
I was. The funny thing is, it may be surprising when you see the film, but I did not have a biased opinion one way or the other through the entire process. I saw people doing things that I didn't like. I saw people doing things that I didn't like all over the place. And I saw people doing things that I did like. But the trial was pretty grim and very frustrating. And, I was there the day that they shut Draytel down. And, 2 weeks before, the judge had made this proclamation where she wanted, and it was to the prosecution as well as to the defense, that like, look, the technology behind this case is so insanely complicated. I have no idea what you're talking about. It's gobbledygook, I think was the word she used. And then 10 days later, she's denying Draytel expert witnesses that he wants to bring forward, claiming that expert knowledge is not needed in this case, where he wanted, to have a technology expert and a Bitcoin expert come forward to explain how Bitcoin wallets get moved around, how anonymous technologies work, how hacking works, the difficulty in actually being able to be 100% certain of what was on the laptop, or what Tor chats that DPR created, whether those were created by Ross at all, who knows? And, to watch it, I understand the prosecution. The prosecution was I'm not exonerating them, but they were doing their job. Their job is to win, right? Their job is to like, they're both sides. Their job is to silence the other side, right? It's like a game of tennis. That's their job. But I was surprised that the judge didn't allow that. It was just over. It was on that day. Not only was he denied those witnesses, there was no more trial. It was literally over that day. And that was stunning. And so I left there and I felt a little naive, because I've been around a while and I've read a lot of, I've read my Orwell and my Huxley, and but I pay my taxes and I vote, and I'm actually a very committed political sort of thinker, for average Joe. So I felt a little naive, because I thought, okay, well, maybe they won't give him such a stiff sentence then, if they're not really going to give him a fair trial.
I know exactly where you're going with it. I know exactly where you're going with this.
And then I went to the sentencing. And I have to tell you, that was when I really felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach, because I was sitting in that sentencing room and I wasn't surrounded by libertarian technology, crypto anarchist freedom fighters. I was surrounded by mostly, junior, law degree students, other people who were very much anti-Ross and anti-Silk Road. They were flabbergasted. I mean, everybody was flabbergasted by the sentence. You could have heard a pin drop in the viewing room where I was. People, like the kids were whispering to each other, like, they can't do that. How did they do that? There wasn't enough charges for them.
Exactly those words. They can't do that. And we are all, we never quite let go of this perception that the world is ultimately, and finally, it might be a little unfair. There might be mistakes along the way, but in the end, there's justice. And that was the thing that struck me about the trial, was just this sort of relentless imposition of sort of a metaphysical despair that came about with the results. It just seemed like what happened wasn't really possible in not just in this country but in this world.
Completely. I mean, I remember being with Lynn, literally walking out of the courtroom, and like both of us were almost laughing. I mean, her son was just sent to prison for the rest of his life without the possibility of parole, and it was so absurd. We kind of almost had trouble believing that it had happened. It just seemed completely unrealistically surreal. But it very much did happen. And, there are very concrete reasons why it did happen. And there's a lot of fear, within the establishment, not just for drugs, but for cyber, for financial regulation. I mean, this case really struck at the intersection, I would argue, of three of the most over-prosecuted areas of law in the US today, which is cyber, the drug war, and financial reform. And that's a very bad seat to be sitting in if you're Ross.
And it's sad because here you have this really earnest, idealist who acted on his ideals in a way that was, perfectly peaceful and truly naive at some level. No more or less naive, than I am on these things.
Yeah, I mean, the sentence made it clear the disparity of vision, I felt like, because, and maybe I'm still naive, but I flatly refuse to believe that they see the Silk Road for what it actually was. I still think that to them it's the boogeyman. I still think that to the establishment, they really do equate Ross with the Unabomber, someone who, or the Boston Marathon bombers, or like someone who was just filled with hate, who just wanted to kill and kill and kill and kill again. And
my sense from the judge was that the more sympathetically he came to be seen in the course of the trial and among his supporters, the more she kind of entered into a state of like personal denial about this,
Yeah, complete. Well, she was very angry. I mean, she was very, very angry that the case had been looked at in the least bit as a political engine. The one argument I would make, and I don't hammer it home in the movie because I don't like movies that hammer their theme home, but the Silk Road was a political engine. It was. That's what it was. And you may not like that fact. You may not like the philosophies behind it. You may not agree with them, but it was. You can't take that away from it. It was a political engine. It was a community. It was an idealistic community. It didn't do everything right. It did some things very, very wrong, but it was a political engine. And that perspective on the Silk Road was driven from the trial. I mean, aggressively and bluntly driven. She made many statements that I will not allow Ross or this case to be looked at philosophically or politically.
Well,
this is about.
When I first discovered this, by the way, it was my primary professional mission in life to distribute the works of Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard. I mean, that's, I put them in commons. I thought every day about, how to educate more people in this perspective, which is just basically Austro-libertarian political economy. And when I went on the Silk Road, I was startled to discover reading groups dedicated to the books that I was personally promoting. And I began to realize that there was a really close, intimate connection. It's sort of a cyber connection in the sense that not a personal connection, but but an intellectual connection there. And it really set me back. I was really struck by I remember Ross or whoever the DPR was at the time writing posts about monopoly theory, like critiquing mainstream monopoly theory for being overly mechanistic, very high level stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was high level stuff. There was real discourse going on there, and I think that struck all of us by surprise. Andy Greenberg, who was running for Forums at the time, was very struck by that. Nicholas Kristen at Carnegie Mellon, all the people that I know that got in early, were really expecting to just find, given the media, this sort of cesspool, and found quite the opposite. And again, it wasn't to exonerate the service as much as factually that's what it was. It was a very, and then another thing happened, which was, and I would argue that I got closer to the actual hands-on physical people who created and ran that site than probably anybody else in terms of meeting with them, discussing with them, and having that kind of interaction. And I was dumbfounded. Like, even I had sort of a second wake-up call, because I still expected, I was like, okay, fine. So you had some architects of the Silk Road who had, libertarian theory, or they had political awareness and ideals, but surely most of these guys are just in it for the money or the drugs. And then every single one of these core vendors that I met, every single one of them was politically motivated. And they were all like grad students. They didn't have money. They weren't driving flashy cars. And, again, some people have gone on to do this later and they've gotten busted almost immediately. But this group of Silk Road people, and it may be, that it was a little anachronism in time, and that's what gave rise to what we're now seeing as a movement. It really was motivated mostly by political ideals, and even the heaviest drugs, even the dealer that I knew, who was the biggest heroin dealer on Silk Road, came from political background, came from the activist movement, came from the anonymous movement, was rabidly anti-drug war, was aggressively trying to bring down the drug war. That was a complete motive. This person almost lives like a hippie. There's no money there. There's no, Bitcoin wallet filled with hundreds of millions of dollars, or all the other nonsense you hear in the media, even today, that people want to turn this into Breaking Bad, which it will just never be. And so again, like it or not, that was the reality that I encountered.
Can we talk now, because given this political perspective of Silk Road, I mean, this thing comes on the heels of what was widely perceived to be, whether real or not, a mass movement of liberty-minded, sort of libertarian political action in this country. And in any case, there was a very strong base of support that might have been ready to rally around Ross. But I remember the ethos of social media changing within the same day of his arrest, with the release of the claim that of the murders for hire. And Alex, it was depressing to me, because these allegedly sort of politically sophisticated libertarians all over the web, suddenly, looking at this, taking the government's word for it, listening to the guy at the lectern, citing a bunch of murder for hire charges, and then seeing on social media, this extremely naive libertarian saying, "Well, I was going to support him, but he violated the non-aggression principles, so he's not my man," and then bailed. And you said this in the film, that you could almost the day that happened feel the sort of what would have otherwise been a widespread support for libertarian activists for his plight just kind of vanish.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been the Achilles heel for this case. And, we don't know the aspect about it that makes me so, dismayed for Lynn and Kirk, for Ross's parents, is that they're, facing an opponent with infinite pockets, and they're paying for the defense out of their own pockets, and it's driving them into massive debt. And for all of the talk that you get from, and a lot of people are my friends, so I don't want to offend them by name, but, a lot of talk you get from sort of the high-end activist organizations and, digital legal organizations, and even government funded legal civil rights organizations. Where are they? And why aren't they being supportive? I mean, and the fact is that to me, again, it's similar to the drugs. If people get hoodwinked by spin and by the sort of the easy, they want an easy answer. And if they're given it the easy answer, they go, oh, okay, now I get to make a decision. I get to go over here. But in cases like this, you don't get to make, if you're really going to be true to your ethics, you don't get to make an easy decision. The thing about the Silk Road case that is so extraordinary is that it isn't easy, is that we don't know everything that happened. And yet, to me, it's what is clear cut is if Ross was not indicted for any attempted murders, which he was not a single one, there are no murders to have believed to have been carried out, not a single one. The genesis of the murders for hire have been proven and pled guilty by a couple of corrupt law enforcement operatives. We know that for a fact. They've already pled guilty and struck plea deals with the government. So why is it that people can't look to the absolutes in this case, which is if this 30-year-old kid has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for charges that do not include these murder for hire charges at all, why is he a pariah to you? Why can't you defend this extraordinary injustice? I almost think, frankly, and I said this to Lynn after the trial, I would have more understanding for the public's inability to think clearly had the judge said, you know what, I don't like you, I don't like the Silk Road, I'm giving you 10 years in jail. I honestly think, in a way, that's easier propaganda. Like, okay, well, you know what, he did some bad things, there might have been this other stuff, whatever. But life in prison, if that precedent is being set for a case like this, that it is inarguably the person is not being charged with violent offenses and then yet is being given the sentence of someone who has committed many violent offenses, there's a problem. There's a legal precedent issue there that needs to be observed. At least even that has to be observed. So I actually find it really dismaying that people have not been able to sort of overcome the kind of knee-jerk reaction to non-facts, frankly.
So I didn't think about this until you just hinted very strongly about this, but the ACLU never took an interest in Ross's case. Am I right?
No. There's been no support. I mean, the EFF very graciously steered them towards Draytel, but to me this is like a stinky sock, and everyone's afraid to go anywhere near it. And I'm disappointed, to be honest with you. I think that the legal precedent that's been set here is so egregious. And so whatever you want to say about it doesn't mean that you're stepping up in support of drug markets. If you're afraid to be seen as citing on something unpalatable to the New York Times, so be it. But the sentencing is really a clear-cut, case of malfeasance. And I'm very disappointed that people haven't taken up that cause.
Yeah, and by the way, I should be clear that I am not, when I condemn the libertarian mass movement, which, by the way, I'm not even convinced there is such a thing as a libertarian mass movement.
Right. Yeah, it's just a public response. It's a response in general.
Yeah. But I must say that Lynn has been treated very affectionately and warmly by the principled sector of libertarian thought. That she was invited to speak at PorcFest. I think she was she's been at conferences, and I love her. I think
that's amazing person.
So she has had a lot of support within that community, but it's been devastating for me too, and shocking how easily it is that people are so manipulated by this. By just the claims, but just to review quickly, the murder for hire charges were never part of the indictment. They were never discussed during the trial. There was no evidentiary rules that
they were brought up a lot during the trial by prosecution, but not as indictments. They were allowed to be. It's what's called an overt act, where they could actually absolutely be talked about by both the prosecution and the judge without the necessity of proof. So if you don't indict and you're not actually charging the person for this crime, you have no burden of proof, which means you can talk about attempted murder all day long to whatever degree you want to talk about it. And remember, Draytel knew during the trial that those two corrupt agents, the DEA agent and the Secret Service agent, had been complicit in manufacturing these murder for hire charges. He was not allowed by the court to discuss that during the trial. So the other side is talking about these murder for hire charges all day long without needing to bring forth any proof. The other side has no ability to refute them with any substantiation, and there they go. I mean, that was, I think, weighed heavily on the jury. I even think it weighed heavily on the judge.
And they were part of the closing statements, right? As I recall.
Yes. Oh yeah. It went on. It went on and on and on and on. It went on through the trial.
Even in the course of the trial, I knew because I think it was reported in Forbes or somewhere about the agent provocateurs or the double agents or triple agents or whatever the hell they were that were on the site that were primarily responsible for these things. So, I mean, I knew things that apparently the jury didn't know.
Oh yeah, absolutely, you did. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of us did. I mean, I knew about a lot of this stuff as well, so it was very frustrating. And again, I wouldn't really, if she'd come back and said I gave him 10 years or 12 years or something, where there's the possibility to get out for less or whatever, something that made sense within the context of the charges, it's one thing. But I just think that, given the sentencing, given the extreme nature of the sentencing, I think that there's a clear-cut legal problem there, and I think that there should be more support and more verbalizing of this clear-cut problem. And instead, all we're going to get, unfortunately, other than primarily you and I talking and a few other people here and there, is we're going to see, more spin in the media that just envelopes this story until it will never snuff out the fact, but there's going to be a lot more sort of hyperbole and nonsense than there's going to be clear-headed fact.
I need to ask you about the possibility of appeal, and I to me, probably your attitude is a little bit like mine. Like, you never want to give up hope for these things, just like I didn't during the trial, and yet our hopes keep being sort of dashed, and then we have to sort of process this new difficult reality. And I'm suspecting that it's a similar situation with the appeal.
Yeah, I as much for Ross as for Lynn, I can't go there. Yeah. Internally. I don't mean with you. I mean, I just can't. It's so bleak, and it would be such a crushing, and that's the reason that I've been so, kind of emotional about the lack of support for this case, because this thing's just going to slide. That's going to be that. And this guy's going to go to jail for the rest of his life. And parents' lives. Right. I mean, it's so unrelentingly tragic and unfair, and it's really hard for me to comprehend. A lot of people have said, "Are you going to make another movie?" Even Lynn has asked me if you're going to make another movie, and I'm on to other things, and I don't know. If their appeal is denied, I mean, I don't know. I may have no choice but to make another movie. It would be very hard for me to sit still if literally that's it. That's all we get, and everyone else is just shutting up. And every once in a while, you get these really idiotic, hyperbolic news items about breaking bad things going on the dark internet, and the entire political nature of what happened gets swept under the rug. It will be hard for me to not do anything about that.
Well, here's the important thing, though, Alex. What you've done, it could have not been done. If it weren't for you, this movie wouldn't exist, and we wouldn't have had one place that we can go to investigate the facts, to learn a little bit about Ross, humanize him, humanize the drug market, see that this is Silk Road's extraordinary innovation and a place for humane engagement of commercial trading relationships that are otherwise banned and will eventually be unbanned because we
completely. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing I say that at Q&As all the time. The sad reality, I saw this with Napster, is that the worst thing that could happen is that, in 10, 15, 20 years, drug markets are going to be ubiquitous. They are. And I mean, fully legal ones. And people aren't going to think twice about it. And hopefully Ross won't be sitting in jail somewhere, when that happens, because that will really be horrible. But like you said, look at the marijuana laws. All of us, most people, your average Joe probably thinks that marijuana is legal, whereas, people are getting socked away in jail, every day. So
every minute.
Yeah. That's the reality that we live in. The drug war is dying, but it is by no means dead. And the sort of the demonization of, the democratization of communities, whether they're in technological communities or otherwise, that demonization and the desire to crush those is certainly not going away anytime soon.
Thank you for making the movie. Again, you can get it on iTunes. You can get it on, is it available on Amazon or no?
Yes, it's available on Amazon, Vimeo, iTunes, and then Netflix is imminent. So.
Oh, so we're getting Netflix soon.
Yep, it's all coming.
And I guess you're not going to you're not going to make your money back from Netflix. I wouldn't imagine, but
Yeah, we're doing very well. We were the #1 doc on iTunes, and we did very, very well. We've been doing great on iTunes, and we actually did very well when we came out on the Epix network, which is where we first platformed. So I'm actually amazed at how well the film has been doing, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, I'm glad for your successes, and just to be clear, this is not for you driven by a money-making venture. This is
no. No, I won't personally ever see a dime out of all that, but I'm happy that whoever made it is getting refunded for their investment.
Yeah. What wonderful job. If you haven't seen it, go look for The Deep Web. Recommend it to your friends. This is a real chance for there to be some element of justice, and we should never underestimate the power of ideas. The power of public opinion. So,
and go to freeross.org and get involved.
Yes, thank you, Alex, for your time and for your work, and for your honesty and forthcomingness in this interview tonight.
Great, thank you. It was great. I appreciate it.
Okay, take care, my friend. Bye bye.